Today we're going to learn how to do radial purfling, which is essentially almost the same process for installation as shell purfling, but there are some tips and tricks to cutting the radial purfling strips. What radial purfling is a installation of thin wood strips along the edge, and you do it in such a way that the grain of the wood is always perpendicular to the body. The way that we do this is by taking some thin wood like this that has a lot of stripy variation to it, and cutting strips off the end as I'm about to show you. Good choices for radial purfling are not only woods that have stripes like the zebra wood, but also ones that are oily and may give off resin or color when you get CA on them, CA glue. That will help fill in some gaps where we break things along edges, but as you can see I'm using zebra wood, which will not give off color when you touch it with CA, and it's still a perfectly good choice. So the bleeding of color is not necessary for your wood choice, but it is good. Also, I know this technique from Todd over here.
How you doing?
I decided to film it today though because I'll be doing it on the guitar. Either way, what we're going to need is we're going to need our piece of wood. It can be whatever width you want, but it's going to be about 100 thou thick, so 0.1 thick, and we're going to cut off 16-inch wide pieces. Now the way we're going to do that is we're actually going to set the fence plus a spacer up so that there's a 1/16 of an inch gap between the blade and the spacer. The reason we're going to do that is we're going to use our miter gauge to butt the wood up against the spacer to get an accurate representation of a 1/16 of an inch, and then when we slide forward the spacer gets left behind so that we don't bind the wood between the fence and the miter gauge, which can be dangerous. To help prevent chip out, we're going to use a cover board like so. As you can see, I've already done the radial purfling on most of the other sections. I leave any Florentine sections to the end for one simple reason. When I put this filler strip, and that's how you do it, this filler strip is going to be what gets glued in, and we'll pull this out when everything is dried, and that's where you crack the radial purfling into. But one thing about this stuff, it's pretty expensive if you buy it from the lutherie supply companies, so I try and get the most use out of it as possible. And by that I mean, if I do this in two separate sections, my first piece I can just have hanging out. I won't have to cut it to length and therefore make it so I can only use it on this shape. Without cutting it to any lengths, it's more reusable, so that's why I do it in two sections. Either way, all this does is it takes the place of where the purfling is going to go. So basically when we do up our binding job, we'll just use it like any other piece of purfling. Make our sandwich, and we'd essentially just tape it in place like we would any other purfling with the binding on the outside. That way, when everything's dried, we can just pull this out and the rest of the binding scheme stays there, glued in place and ready to crack radial purfling into. You can make this yourself. It's essentially just ultra high molecular weight plastic. Ultra high molecular weight plastic, not much sticks to it, so using this stuff you can actually do binding jobs with essentially any of the major glues that you would want to do a binding job with. I use fish glue. I really like its high initial tack, as well as its ability to be heated and reset if you have any spots with gaps, as I mentioned in my binding video. You could also do it with tight bond. Even super glue will not stick to ultra high molecular weight plastic. Alright, so now that we've taken out the filler strip and we have our blank spot, we are going to start installing the radial purfling strips. no matter what you do when you cut these radial purfling strips, there's going to be a slight variance in the thickness. So I like to cut a lot of them so that I can, if one doesn't fit or if it's too loose, I can just try a different piece and go with that one instead. So since I already glued my binding, there's glue that's sealing the channel, and if you did not do something like this where you had inside purfling or something or other, you'd probably want to seal the channel with shellac before you actually flood it with super glue, which is what we're going to do when we're done here. And literally, I'm just going to go around snapping in pieces. And literally, when I say snapping, you'll actually get snaps, just like with pearl. You can hear them as I go through. So that's starting to get a little fat for there. So I'll stop with that piece. Actually, maybe I'll put it over here. Ah, no, that was the piece getting fat, not the channel getting thin. So now that I've got the purfling cracked into place all around the body, we're ready to start flooding the channel. This whole body only took me about not even 15 minutes, so it's a very, very quick thing to do. And when I'm done, I kind of run my fingernail or something in the channel to make sure that everything's seating as deep as possible. And then literally, I'm just going to go and put super glue in the channel. Just flood it like that, and I'm going to go around. And that's it. That's radial purfling. Now that we have some of our sections done up, I'm going to show you that you can indeed scrape this just like any other wood. I mean, it is very short grain. So when I first did this on a different guitar, I would have thought you wouldn't be able to scrape it because you'd chip a lot out. But keep a nice, decently sharp scraper. This one's not amazingly sharp. It's hard to sharpen a French scraper really well. But it's decently sharp with a nice burr on the edge. And so I'm just doing this one little section here to show you guys what I mean. But as you can see from the shavings and from the spot where I did it, you can scrape it just like anything else.